All right. Good afternoon. I'm Scott Kowalski with the law firm of Petty Livingston, Dawson and Richards here in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I am the vice chairman of the Government Relations Committee for the Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance. On behalf of the LRBA and our almost 800 members and their 43,000 plus employees, we welcome you to our 2020 Federal Candidate Forum. The Alliance proudly represents the counties of Amherst, Appomattox, Bedford, and Campbell, and the towns of Alta Vista, Amherst, Appomattox, Bedford, and Brookneal, as well as the city of Lynchburg. Day in and day out, the Alliance works to promote the economic growth and to enhance the quality of life of all residents in the greater Lynchburg region. At this time of year, however, we'd like to encourage all of our members, and indeed everyone in the region, to participate in the electoral process, which begins with learning where those running for election or re-election are on the issues of importance to the Alliance. And of course, we encourage everyone to show up on November 3rd at the polls and cast their vote for the candidate of their choice. Today, we are delighted to have the opportunity to interview Mr. Nicholas Betts. He's a candidate for the Congressional 5th District, and learn from him why he is running for election and what his positions are on the issues of importance to the Alliance, including congressional activity during the COVID pandemic, the state of manufacturing, higher education funding, the condition of U.S.-China relations, and much more. Ultimately, each interviewee is encouraged to explain to the viewers why he should earn your vote. Welcome, Mr. Betts, to our interview. Before we begin our question and answer session, getting your responses, we'd like to hear a little bit from you about your background, why you're running for office, and what your priorities are.
Sure. Thank you for having me here today. I greatly appreciate the opportunity. My name is Nicholas Betts. I'm a candidate in Virginia's 6th Congressional District. And, I'm running because I want to make sure folks have a choice on the ballot this year. I think these are trying times. And I'd like to tell you a little bit more about myself, by answering these questions. But let me start off by just, speaking a little bit about myself. I've had the opportunity to work in business, work in the education field, and work in the legal field. I have my bachelor's degree from Virginia Commonwealth University in history with a minor in political science. I have my master's degree in history from Virginia Commonwealth University, and I have a law degree from Washington Lee University School of Law. Some of my experience in the work world include worked as a graduate teaching assistant while earning my master's degree. I substitute taught for a while. I worked for a small family business as a consultant and then later as a contracts manager. And currently I work for a law firm in Roanoke, Virginia as a law clerk. Just some personal information about me. I live in Lexington, Virginia with my wife, Lindsay, and my dog, Hendrix. We've lived here for going on 5 years. And, we met in college, our freshman year of college, dated throughout college, got married in 2015. And married for about 5 years.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Betts. All right. Our first topic and question for the day is congressional activity during the COVID pandemic. In the first 2 months of the pandemic, Congress authorized roughly $3 trillion in coronavirus relief in 4 separate measures. These bills attempt to protect the American economy from the long-term harm caused by stay-at-home orders and respond to the overall impact of the virus. These packages included billions of dollars in aid for testing, education, small business relief, corporate relief, local and state government assistance. Two-part question for you, Mr. Betts. What is your assessment of the effectiveness of these relief packages? And considering the impact on the deficit and the national debt, what can Washington do to avoid having to continue issuing such large relief measures in the future?
So my response to that would be, I think it's incomplete. Although the stock market has recovered, and some larger businesses and medium-sized and maybe even larger small businesses have recovered, there's still a lot of small businesses that are hurting, because folks are still concerned about going out in the pandemic. A lot of restaurants, things of that nature. Also, folks have less expendable income. A lot of folks do. We still have very high unemployment historically, 8%, and it's kind of been stagnant there for a while. And in fact, if you look at the workforce participation rate, actually it dropped from August to September, which tells me that really the unemployment rate has only dropped a little bit not because the economy is improving, it's improved, or it's the workforce participation rate indicates that folks are long-term discouraged workers or retiring early or just not able to find jobs. And that's why the unemployment rate is dropping at this point. What we really need to do is make sure that this is a complete recovery so that everybody is able to recover equally. I do understand that that may increase the deficit, but we need to look at it this way, in my opinion. During World War II, when we were fighting, to preserve freedom, we ran huge deficits, and we had to do that to keep folks safe. And I think this is a different type of crisis, but more Americans, twice as many Americans, have died in the COVID pandemic as in World War One, and only the Civil War and World War II have cost more American lives. So we need to make sure that first we get the pandemic under control. That's testing, that's PPE, personal protective equipment to the folks that need it. That also means that we're going to have to, while this is still ongoing, make sure that people have the resources they need to keep food on the table and a roof over their head. One way we can do that is by having buying surplus food from farmers. To help out with food, with housing. I'm proposing that we help people out with their back rent or back mortgages for essentially the time period where they lost business, where they lost their job, where they had their hours cut. So I believe that if we right now is the time to get things stabilized, get things back on track, and then invest in things that will grow our economy in the future to reduce deficits, like education, like broadband infrastructure, like clean, green, renewable energy source jobs, and making sure folks have healthcare. So now is the time to act. Now is the time to make sure folks have the resources they need.
Great, thank you, Mr. Betts.
Thank you.
Speaking of investment, the next question is going to deal with U.S. manufacturing. One of the few positive developments during the pandemic has been a renewed interest in seeing more overseas manufacturing return to the United States. This is a couple parts of this question. First, do you agree that certain manufacturing sectors should be encouraged to return to the U.S., including the production of pharmaceuticals, health and safety products, including the PPE you just mentioned, and the domestic manufacture of equipment for the electrical grid? And the second part of the question is, what can or should the federal government do to encourage that return?
And I think those are all things that we should encourage through tax incentives, by giving businesses the economic flexibility to hire workers in those fields, to build infrastructure and bring jobs back to America and bring jobs back here to Virginia's 6th Congressional District. Additionally, I think that we should look at some technologies of the future. We should give businesses the economic flexibility to develop clean, green, renewable energy source jobs, which are the jobs of the future. We need to look long term and say, okay, what's the direction the world's taking, and what industries should we focus on bringing jobs back here to America or creating jobs here in America? And I would say that a lot of countries right now are getting ahead of us on wind and solar technology, and I think it's going to be imperative if we want to create economic growth in the future that we incentivize businesses to develop technologies that will keep us competitive in the 21st century. And I think that's, if you look at how the private sector's moved, there's a lot more interest in, electric vehicles and solar panels, so what we need to do is, as I think that the federal government needs to free up the private sector to invest by giving, incentives for industries such as this to hire workers. And, I think if we do that, we'll really see economic growth in the long term, and it'll create jobs that'll be long lasting and good, well-paying jobs, that'll help us recover.
Thank you, Mr. Betts. So tax incentives, is that what you were referring to?
But I would say I would like to see those tax incentives be tied to hiring workers or infrastructure spending. One thing that is concerning or has been concerning is, sometimes there's a lot of stock buybacks or something of that nature, which doesn't really, generate economic growth. So I think we need to narrowly craft the legislation to give economic flexibility for, infrastructure development and hiring workers.
Thank you. Looking at the confusion, this is a kind of a follow-on question here. Looking at the confusion created for Virginia businesses with the Department of Labor and Industry emergency regulations that are being considered in the state, what is your position on whether uniform and clear federal standards should be created or provided from the federal level?
I do think we need to have a federal plan. I will say this, though. I think that on some level, the states need to, it needs to be a partnership where we work with the states. There's places where the COVID pandemic has hit a lot harder, and you may have states where the COVID pandemic has not been as impactful, even though it's really impacted everywhere. But in hot spots or when there's a new wave hitting certain localities, I do think that states need to have the flexibility to act.
Thank you, Mr. Betts. All right, we're going to move on to another sector, another question. This is the state of U.S.-China relations, and mostly in trade. Even before the outbreak of the pandemic, the state of U.S.-China trade relations was volatile, if not bitter. COVID-19 has certainly complicated those relations. Both countries have imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of one another's goods. First question is this. What is your position on allowing Chinese government-controlled or directed corporations to invest in certain critical sectors of the U.S. economy? That would be infrastructure, information technology, defense manufacturing, that sort of thing. So, and if you want to comment specifically on Huawei or TikTok or anything like that, please feel free to.
We do need to balance encouraging outside investors and national security. I do think that balance should really be reviewed by Congress and, go through all the branches of government. I don't think it should be universal, unilateral executive branch, decision-making on that. But I do think we need to balance national security and make sure that we protect our, electronic infrastructure. Having said that, I think we need to make sure that if are interested investors, that they have an outlet to do that. And I think that, I really think it's something that we just need to take on a case-by-case basis, because we really do want to encourage outside investment, but we need to know what are the motives behind this investment. Is it, generally just an economic partnership, or is there, something more nefarious that may be a hidden intention? So I think that we need to critically look at every, outside investment from any geopolitical competitor and see, is it a good faith attempt to work in an economic partnership, or are there national security concerns which would override our desire to do something like that? Because we need to make sure that we do protect national security.
Appreciate that. And with regard to Huawei, what is your position on the Huawei investment that's being?
Yeah, I'm concerned about Huawei. I mean, I would have to say that, I think that we need to, if we can develop these technologies like 5G here, that would be for the best, because we do want to have, maintain solid control of our own networks.
Thank you. Second question on U.S.-China relations is the tariffs. As you know, and as I mentioned in the outset, tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of goods have been imposed back and forth between U.S. and China. What is your position on those tariffs? And if you disagree with the tariffs, what would your proposal be as an alternative means of working against the Chinese influence? And if those proposals have ever been used before, and if they've ever been successful?
So my opinion would be that, I do think the tariffs have stifled economic growth. They've hurt farmers, they've limited markets for crops. So I do think we need, I think the best thing to do is to look at how we can work with China in a mutually beneficial way, where where we're not running huge deficits, but we're also trading commodities or manufactured goods that are beneficial in trade. So I do think what we need to do is try to have a more balanced trade relationship with them. But I think it should be by working together to see how we can help each other out, because I think it fosters more economic growth. It creates jobs, shipping jobs. Farmers have markets for their products, because I think really what tariffs do is they stifle economic growth, and sometimes cost jobs, which I think has been the case in this trade war.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Betts. And did you have any specific proposal that you would, other than just doing additional trade?
I would have to say that I think that, and I'll just be quite frank, I think trade is one of the most, complex issues. And I think really you just have to kind of look what's on the table and see if it's a fair deal, and just try to make sure that we balance imports and exports with nations such as China to the best of our ability.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Betts. We'll move on to higher education now. The Lynchburg region is blessed to have several excellent private and public institutions of higher learning. Most funding for colleges and universities comes from state allocations and tuition and fees paid by students and parents. What do you think, this is the first question, what do you think has been the main cause of growth in the costs in higher education?
I think part of it is lack of government funding. I do think we should increase funding, but I think when we increase the funding, federal government funding, I should say, and state government funding, a lot of times when there's economic issues, unfortunately, education is the first thing cut. So I think we need to increase our federal investment in education, because right now, states have been hit hard because of, less sales tax coming in. So I think the federal government needs to step in, and, quite frankly, it's an investment in our future. We had the Morrill Act in the 1860s that established public land grant colleges and universities, made us one of the leaders in education in the world, through today. So I think when we invest in our education system, including higher education, it keeps the cost of tuition down. Now, I will say, I think that should be tied directly to hiring professors and to lowering tuition, because, I do think there are a lot of unnecessary expenditures at public universities, whether it's building 3 gyms. I mean, you probably have like one gym, or like, building super fancy dorms. So I do see some necessity to rein in unnecessary expenditures, but I do think that we should invest to try to lower the cost of tuition, because we have $1.6 trillion in outstanding student loan debt right now. It's a hindrance on folks, getting a start to life, family formation, buying a house. So I think it's really crucial that we address this problem and tackle it. One thing I'm proposing to deal with the current outstanding student loan debt is to permanently make student loan interest rates 0%, to free up capital for people to save for things like buying a house. And I think we need to balance both outstanding student loan debt by creative solutions like eliminating student loan interest rates, and currently we need to make sure that we do fund public higher education, and give folks make public higher education more affordable and accessible. However, at the same time, we need to make sure that those dollars are going directly to lower the cost of tuition and help improve the 4 to 6 year graduation rate. One way would be hiring more full-time faculty so students can get enrolled in the classes they need. And those would be some solutions I would propose to bring down the cost of higher education.
And so the funding mechanism, where would you propose to obtain the funds that you're talking about to lower the cost of tuition and go directly toward hiring more professors? The
federal government has unlimited purchasing power. just passed the unfunded tax cut a few years ago that was 2.4 trillion dollars. We've just passed a bunch of bills that were trillions of dollars. The thing is, the federal government has the ability to have tremendous purchasing power, and it's just it's a policy choice on what we invest in. And I think we should invest in educating our populace, and I think that will pay dividends in the future.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Betts. Now, another topic in terms of expenditures, healthcare. What is your position on healthcare generally? And as part of that, you can address the Affordable Care Act and whether it should be left as it is, modified, repealed, and then we'll get on to a secondary question.
So I think, one of the most important things about the Affordable Care Act is it covers folks with pre-existing conditions. And, I think that's something that should be maintained in any healthcare act. I'm proposing a low-cost, affordable public healthcare option, which could be opt-out. So if folks want to keep their private health insurance, that would be part of the plan. But we want to make sure that we get everybody insured, because in one way or another, whether it's through the public healthcare option or private healthcare option, because I think we've seen during the pandemic, it's a necessity. If folks don't have access to healthcare, they may not realize they're sick. They may, spread things such as coronavirus. Folks will be, potentially go to work or out to the store and, spread it unknowingly. And, because they're worried about going to the doctor because of the high, medical bill cost. I think having a low-cost opt-out public healthcare option will bring down the cost of healthcare overall, because it'll cause, the private healthcare insurance to lower premiums and deductibles to compete. And I think overall it'll save Americans money on healthcare.
Got to unmute. Just as a follow-up to that, Mr. Betts, you're saying a public health care option and it's opt-out. Is that, who is funding that public health care option?
Really, what would happen? Folks already have healthcare. They may, they just be paying into the system. Initially, yeah, we'd have a government investment in that, but we can't, it would be funded as a combination of reducing healthcare costs would bring some of it down. It would also be funded by individuals paying into the public healthcare option, as well as the government would partially fund it. And I think that's a worthy investment, because look at the havoc the coronavirus pandemic has played. This may not be the last pandemic we see in our lifetime. Additionally, folks have all kinds of healthcare issues where, if treated earlier, could save a lot of money. And I think people sometimes avoid going to the doctor or the hospital because they're worried about the cost. So if we were able to catch illnesses earlier, that would save money. So I think it would really be a balance between cost saving, folks paying into the public healthcare option, as well as some initial government investment.
So there would be, individuals would pay premiums for this public health care option.
It would be essentially, there would be a public health, yes. And so it would, you'd still be paying in, but it would be I would say a lower cost option.
Other than the public health care option, the opt-out that you just mentioned, what other modifications would you make or could the federal government suggest to the healthcare system?
I really kind of have to stick to that plan, because I think that'll help a lot. I think it'll help bring down costs, and I think that, the solution that I proposed is a good one. I will say this, we could build more hospital infrastructure, which would be imperative to, essentially handling, folks in times of crisis, such as this. That's one of the reasons why there was so much loss of life, I think, at the beginning, is, there weren't enough hospital beds for people. Also in rural communities, a lot of times, there's just certain procedures you can't have done. Like here in the 6th district, there are places where there's gaps in, essentially certain types of medical treatments. So I think, increasing hospital infrastructure is another area I think would be reasonable to try to expand.
And those are publicly owned hospitals? Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, I mean, we could look at a public-private partnership to build them, but I think that that's something that we should consider.
All right. Thank you, sir. Now we're going to move on to a different sector of the economy, broadband and technology. So, prior to the pandemic, Lynchburg region's localities were working hard to improve broadband service and coverage. COVID-19's impact on healthcare, education, government, and industry makes the need for reliable, high-speed, and dependable internet service an essential utility. CARES Act funding has supported state and local governments' investment in prioritizing broadband initiatives for telemedicine, telework, and virtual education. Two-part question. What has the federal government done to better assist localities in deploying the broadband internet service into rural areas of the state? And what else would you propose be done?
I know some funding was given through the CARES Act. I do think it should expansion of broadband infrastructure should be a state, federal, and local partnership. I do think we need to scale this up and try to get it done quicker and increase coverage. That it should be I think this is something that has bipartisan interest, and I think it's something that we need to act on immediately. If you look at it, I mean, so much of life is conducted over the internet, as you just said, whether it's telemedicine, whether it's, kids educating themselves for online school, folks educating themselves, higher education programs online, whether it's, conducting business or commerce, over the internet. There's just so many areas where it's imperative, whether it's working, a lot of folks are working from home now, and, that's imperative, or civic engagement, where folks can, kind of see what's going on and look at, different candidates and make their choice for democracy. So I think this is one of the crucial issues of our time. I see some historical analogies to building the highway system in, the 50s. We moved quickly to get that done. It increased commerce and increased, the ability to travel, throughout the country. And in the 21st century, I think the internet is the highways of the 21st century. So, honestly, this would be another way to really put people back to work if we scale it up. Maybe we can have some temporary programs to, have folks install broadband infrastructure, and that would give them the skill set, to go back into the private sector once that effort was complete, whether it's starting their own small business or entering the private sector workforce. But I think we should have a large, mobilization to get broadband infrastructure and high-speed internet, both to constituents of the 6th District and to all folks in the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. Betts. And have you explored or researched any of the satellite internet delivery systems that are being
some, and I think it's more effective in certain areas compared to others. I know sometimes I think like in more mountainous regions and stuff, there's sometimes more problems. I think it can be used, I think, as like a intermediate solution. And it can, and there may be some places where it's more level and that it could be a permanent solution, but there's just places I think where it's harder for the satellite internet to be as effective from my understanding.
All right, thank you, Mr. Betts. We're going to move on to a question about the restaurant industry.
Sure.
In addition to being part of the lifeblood of our communities, U.S. restaurants do over $800 billion worth of business annually and employ over 15 million workers as of 2019. This industry has been severely impacted by the pandemic, perhaps as much as any other industry in the country. Local and state governments are providing some financial relief and flexibility on offering new dining options. The federal government has provided $120 billion in rescue funds, and the SBA provided PPP grants and loans through the EIDL program. The industry itself continues to undergo a massive transformation. In June, U.S. Representative Earl Blumenauer introduced the Restaurants Act of 2020, which is shorthand for the real economic support that acknowledges unique restaurant assistance needed to survive. In the Senate, it was Republican Senator Roger Welker of Missouri who introduced a mirror bill in July. 3 Democrats and 2 Republican senators, including South Carolina's Lindsey Graham, have signed on as co-sponsors. The nearly identical bills both aim to establish a $120 billion restaurant revitalization fund at the U.S. Treasury Department, earmarked for grants that would go to independent restaurants. Do you support this legislation, and what do you know about that legislation?
From what I know, I do support it. I think it's going to help a lot of small restaurants get back on their feet, and I think that a lot of small restaurants are, as you said, like the lifeblood of our communities. Now, I think that in addition to passing a bill like this, we also need to get the pandemic under control because it's part of it. We need to have people's confidence in going to the restaurants, and also we need to make sure that folks have expendable income to be able to go to their local restaurants and support them. That's one thing that I was talking about, investing in some of these projects that I've talked about during this. And what it does is it frees up capital for people to invest in their local businesses, or essentially to go to their local businesses to buy food. So it's I'd say, in addition to passing legislation such as this, I'd say 2 additional factors that need to be considered are getting the pandemic under control, so people have confidence, going and sitting down at the restaurants, and then also making sure that folks have enough expendable income that they will continue to be able to go to their local businesses.
Beyond this funding mechanism, what else could federal government, or what could or should the federal government do to assist restaurant owners and employees?
So I would say, making sure that, that folks have confidence in everything, being moving in the right direction with the pandemic, and also making sure that folks have expendable income. Those are additional things other than the legislation that you propose, which I think sounds like a step in the right direction. Those 3 things I think will get things back on track.
Okay, thank you. Final question. The transportation and the airline industry, more particularly focused on the airline industry. In late May, the News in Advance wrote that despite seeing a dramatic decline in ridership amid the coronavirus pandemic, the Lynchburg Regional Airport will likely end the year with a fiscal surplus of $500,000, thanks to millions of dollars in federal aid. The airport has been awarded more than $6 million as part of the CARES Act, a sweeping $2 trillion federal rescue package passed into law in March. This is a quote from the airport director, Andrew Lagala. With the help of the Federal CARES Act grant, the airport is anticipating it will not need any city funding to support the airport during the next several years as the airline industry gradually recovers and airport revenues return to normal levels. Several questions, and I'll just start with the first one. What do you understand to be the state of the airline industry at large, and with a particular emphasis on Lynchburg region?
What I understand is that people are traveling less, so there are real impacts to the airline industry. Also, I know that recently, a lot of airline workers have been furloughed, so I think it's imperative that we make sure that we preserve one of the industries that allows for travel within our country.
Okay. Second question on the airline industry. What was your position on the first relief package that was provided to airlines, which I think was about $58 billion?
One thing that I would have liked to see, like I said, I do think that we need to make sure that we preserve the airline industry, but I would have liked to see stronger protections for workers, making sure that they, I think part of the past and part of future considerations for the airline industry, we need to really think about making sure that that money is partially used or a lot of it's used to make sure that folks keep their jobs, and I think that's something that's crucial in any type of relief package.
So the first relief package set aside $25 billion for payroll grants for employees. What is your position on further relief to the airline industry, and how much relief do you think the airline industry should be provided?
I think how much relief would depend on what type of agreements they would, have for that money to make sure they retain their workforce. Because if we give the airline industry more funds, we want it used to help people keep their jobs. We don't want it to be used to buy back stock and things of that nature, or CEO bonuses. So I think any future relief will, and how much, will depend on how long and how serious the airline industry is, or different companies are, to retaining their workers for the long haul and paying them.
Okay, and final question on the airline industry. What would you recommend other than relief packages as a solution to help the airline industry?
I really think to really get the airline industry back on track, we got to reduce the spread of COVID, and we got to increase consumer confidence, because the airline industry is really based on travel. And so, if folks don't feel comfortable traveling, the airline industry is going to, continue to suffer until we can restore consumer confidence in travel and on riding airlines. So I think a huge part of restoring consumer confidence is maintaining and handling the pandemic, whether that's, education on how to reduce the spread, more PPE, whether that's, working on the vaccine, things of that nature. Once the spread of COVID is reduced, then we will have a more confident consumer who's more willing to travel, and that will benefit the airline industry and, a lot of other industries as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
That's the conclusion of our questions, and appreciate your time this afternoon. I'd like to give you a final moments to sum up and then present to the region your thoughts and policies.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with folks. A lot of what I've talked about are investments in things that will generate economic growth. Generating economic growth is one way to reduce deficits. And what we need to do is make sure when we have relief packages or things of that nature during this time of crisis, that the relief and aid is put towards things that generate economic growth, which will over time, help folks out, as well as, the growth will reduce the deficits over time too. So I think it's imperative that we work together, that we all, we're all Americans, we're all human beings, we're all in this together. And that if we work together, we can get through this. And I believe we can do that, and, get back on track, and, get the economy moving again, as well as to preserve life. And, thank you for having me again here today.